welcome everyone. Last month, we talked about some of our traits and how those align with our leadership style. We dug a little into what leadership styles there are, traditionally, and how our traits lean into those styles. And more so, because we had a deeper understanding of each leadership style, we were also able to decide if we wanted to change things up a little, right? So that was the exciting point of last month. This month, we're going to dig a little deeper, and we want to now lean into our core values and the why it's important to align your values to your leadership style.
Right. So better understanding ourselves and is basically better understanding our values, right? Our values tend to come from our core beliefs. That's how we view ourselves, the world, and others. That can be rooted in so many different things, right? That's why I encourage most people to go to therapy, but to really kind of dive in and explore those things, unpack those things for yourself. But in the most general form, it's important to be able to understand our perspective. Essentially, our core beliefs are our perspective of the world, our perspective of ourselves, and then other people. In going into those layers, it allows us to better understand then how to align our leadership, our felt sense of our leadership now, where we want to be, and then how we want to develop that based on who we really fully are.
I think it's so important to dive into sometimes just definitions, right? Because there's a way that I can define something and a way that you can define it. Of course, we all have Webster's dictionary that gives us a core definition, right? But how does that really show in me? Right. So I think that is really important. On this slide that we're showing you, it shows just a general definition of what these values mean.
Yeah, these values in particular, but there's so many, and some we might feel stronger about some than others. Some might not be on the slide for you. In general, it's important to have that big picture definition of like, what is empathy? Let me understand it as a concept. The next step to this, which is the same thing we want to do with our core values, is to be able to understand what place does this really hold in my life?
Right.
How does it show up in my life? How do I really put it into practice in the different levels of my life, professionally, personally, all of those things? We can't only focus on one area of our life because we're not one dimensional, right? We're not like, okay, this is me professionally and this is me outside of that world. No, those worlds very much intertwine. It's how we relate with those three core beliefs, those areas of three core beliefs, and those are all intertwined at all times. So, for instance, courage. We see this definition here. We can think of a perfect example would be a firefighter. The courage that it takes and bravery that it takes to run into the fire when everybody else is trying to run out and save themselves.
Definitely running out.
Right. And all of those, we see that we're like, absolutely, that's courage. Getting in there, trying to save that person and really be able to make sure that they're able to live a full life, all of those things. And that's courageous. We see that. We know that we can check that box easily. But what are other ways that the courage shows up in our relationships at home with our partners, with our children, in our relationships at work, right? The courage that it can take, for example, for us to be human as a leader to someone else that we're trying to mentor, right? We're not supposed to look like we know it all, because when we do, that doesn't necessarily look authentic or really like connectable in a way where like, I don't know if you get me because you're like over here and I'm over here. That's not true. That's not real. We're all human, and that's where we can connect. And it is courageous to be able to show ourselves in our full humanity, right? That's an example of like, it's not running into a fire for sure, not. However, it is opening ourselves up to be vulnerable. And that's an important piece of courage.
I think one of the pieces that always takes us back a level is the comparison, right? Because that's what we're doing. We're either comparing it to a definition on the screen per se, or to another leader that we had in our life, right? So you go back and you think, oh, that leader was always the smartest in the
Right.
room, the most talented. He came into work the earliest, left the latest. So because that's in our mind, we're always like, well, and that's sometimes what brings us women even further back, because you're like, do I want to be that person? I don't want to be that person. So that means I don't want to be a leader in this company.
Or we haven't been seen ourselves represented in those spaces as well. What does that look like? And you know, there's certainly the stereotypes of like women in leadership that, you know, we try to combat on a regular basis, or maybe even lean into a little heavier in other ways. But all of those layers certainly play a role in kind of when we just kind of like evolve into a leader rather than intentionally apply the things we want to apply, show up the way we want to show up because we're falling into whatever we've seen as is like a professional leader role. That doesn't necessarily have to apply to us. You know, we can infuse that, rather we should infuse ourselves into that. And that's the whole point of this. Yes, our values. What's in our values? Humor can be part of our values, right? We can be silly, or can we? Can we be silly in a space of leadership and still feel that we are respectable, right? Respect is one of those things. What does that look like for you and each of us?
Right.
And that's okay for it to be different from person to person. It just has to be authentic to you, because that's where we're going to really thrive the most.
Right. I think aligning the values to your style, to your leadership style, would mean defining these values for yourself, right? Once you take a look at these definitions and plenty of others that you can find,
right,
it's now bringing it to yourself. You must redefine what these values mean. How do I convey this? How do I feel this? Which brings us to the golden rule and the platinum rule. I think the majority of us, not based on our ages, but we're raised in the golden rule, you know, do unto others as you would like done to yourself. But now there's a platinum rule, do unto others as they would like, right? So it's not just, well, I don't like doing that, so I'm not going to do that to someone else. But how do you know that they do?
Right.
They appreciate those things. Just because you're a direct person doesn't mean you have to be direct with someone who doesn't like direct feedback. So I think now it's more so the platinum rule that we should kind of tailor our lives towards. My definition of any one of these things is mine, but we have to realize that the person sitting in front of us, their definition of what this means can be a little different. And vulnerability is key here.
Yeah, and that also I think is particular to like a leadership style and a value that feels important, right? Like in the therapeutic process, we talk about that in regards to like love languages. What, you know, we often speak from our love language rather than our partners or our children's, or, you know, love doesn't only have to mean like in a romantic way or in a relational or family relational way, but those ways in which we connect and convey is often the ways in which we receive. Now, as Vanessa's describing, the platinum rule is like considering that other in the way in which they will receive the information better and then be able to do more with it, rather than feeling constricted by your perspective of what it's going to be to be successful, or my perspective of what it means to be approachable, whatever, right?
Yeah, it's definitely a back and forth, and it's a trial and error, right? There are certain pieces that you need to test first, but as it says in front of us, right, the first step is kind of taking that time to identify and understand our core values and adding that piece of defining them, right? Once we've defined them, then we can start creating that plan. And that plan doesn't need to be one, set it and forget it, right? We can evolve with that plan as our team members evolve.
Sure. Right. I mean, that's for sure an important piece, is like that constant learning and growing. That in and of itself, again, opening ourselves up to that is, you know, vulnerability is the word of the day, apparently, is a vulnerable process, but it's important to understand that we always gain from another, right? We might be the leaders, we might be in the position of teaching, of mentoring. That doesn't mean that it's not a mutual relational thing that we construct together and then grow and learn together, right? We can't forget those pieces. And so, yes, it's always evolving. for the sake of our betterment, but then also hopefully, right, that around us too. Putting that then into practice once we understand it for ourselves can mean not only like implementing, but can also mean welcoming another to consider these things for themselves, right? It's not just I have to because I'm already in a position of leadership. It's as a leader, how do I want to pass that on as well and get my team thinking about all of these things for them as well, because that helps everyone ultimately.
Right. I think in these cases, you're thinking about yourself, like, how do I get better? How do I define values for myself? But I believe the end goal is for this to be a cycle with everyone, right? That you know that you're helping them, and by that you're helping yourself as well.
Yeah.
And that's why it's so fulfilling, right? Being in any leadership role at home, at work, at church, wherever you take that role on, is fulfilling if you open yourself to receive as well, not just giving.
Absolutely. And then be able to acknowledge growth, understand that, that's not a linear process for most people, and, be gracious with yourself and understanding I wanted to get to this point, but maybe I didn't, right? If we kind of set a timeline or an intention for ourselves and know that like we need to be that it's a living process. It's not just like 1, 2, 3, right? It's like, oh, something happened. I was going this way. Something happened here. I swerved. That's okay. Let me get right back on track. All of those layers for ourselves, for those around us, and understanding that that's such an important part of the process, and be able to celebrate, and give feedback when we need to give feedback and receive feedback, right? And ask for feedback even, right? All the layers of that.
Yeah. I'm hoping that after listening to last month's, you sat with at least one team member to ask for that feedback. Is it difficult to hear in some cases? Yes, you have to be prepared, right? So be prepared before you ask for feedback. If you're going to truly be willing to listen, make adjustments where needed, but honestly, just take it in. It's very hard to share if you don't feel the person can receive it. But at the same time, sitting on the other seat of receiving the feedback, it's difficult to hear that someone prefers a different method than the one you're implementing. So
yeah,
takes both sides.
Oh, 100%. And it's those layers of, we might perceive something from one angle. And I mean, that's the beauty of relationships, is that we're going to see it from two different perspectives. And that's how we can really grow.
Yes. So let's take the time to celebrate those successes, right? And regardless if they're an implementation of how we can be better, let's also do that, because that helps us. That helps us grow as well.
Yeah.
So on the slide, you'll have our contact information. Reach out, stay connected. And next month, we will also share a recorded webinar, but we'll also have an in-person workshop on March 16th. You're welcome to register.
See you soon.
Bye.